In 2019, a wave of gangland violence swept through the Coolock area of Dublin, leaving 5 men dead in the span of a year. Now, years later, a Dublin court trial has finally lifted the lid on its origins, with a drug debt, a betrayal, and a chain of revenge that would turn local criminals against each other. At the center of it was 22-year-old Jordan Davis, a small-time drug dealer and young father from Darndale. Jordan had gotten in over his head with a massive drug debt to a more senior criminal. According to evidence later revealed in court, Davis was known by the nickname Jordo on his suppliers' tick lists, which is a ledger of drug debts. The list, found by Gardaí, showed Jordo owing an astonishing €153,000 at one point. Even after some payments, a later entry still had €70,000 written beside his name with the words, "Not yet," indicating a huge sum he had yet to repay. Jordan's debits were owed to Robert Rue Redmond, a career criminal well known in Dublin's underworld. Redmond, in his late 30s, was a seasoned gangster with 99 prior convictions, including armed assaults, extortion, and even a murder conviction. He had supplied drugs to younger dealers like Jordan on credit, expecting hefty profits in return. But when Jordan fell behind on payments, Redmond's patience ran out. By the end of 2018, there was hostility between the two. As Jordan struggled to pay back the money, the situation turned increasingly dangerous. In a testimony given years later, Jordan's mother, Sandra Davis, described how the threats against her son escalated. Just after Christmas 2018, 2 men showed up at her family home in Coolock, looking for Jordan. One was a huge man with dark hair and a beard, known by the nickname Smithser, and the other was Jordan's close friend, 22-year-old Sha Little. Little was someone Sandra knew from the neighborhood. Now he was standing in her living room, doing all the talking, and he was furious. Sha Little and Smithser, later identified as Colin Smith, a notorious cartel hitman, told Sandra that Jordan owed them €120,000 in total, an enormous sum, and they weren't leaving without the money. Little was enraged, calling Jordan a little prick, and warning Sandra that if the debt wasn't paid, your son is going to be getting buried with your daughter. The men demanded that Sandra contact Jordan immediately. Terrified, she tried to call her son. Jordan sent back a text claiming he was in the hospital, a clear lie, a stalling tactic that only made Little even angrier. He said she would be identifying Jordan in a coffin if the money wasn't produced. Eventually, Colin Smith intervened to de-escalate, telling Little to leave it there, we should get out of here, and assuring Sandra that if she promised to talk sense into her son, they'd give Jordan a chance to sort it out. Before leaving, Smith told her, "I'm taking your word that you will sort this out." With that, the 2 gangsters drove off into the night, leaving Sandra shaken and furious with her son. In the aftermath of that encounter, Jordan did make efforts to pay his debts, at least partially. Jordan admitted he had agreed to pay them €5,000 per week, though he could only manage €3,000 weekly due to his financial strain. True to his word, a few days later, Jordan scraped together €3,000 in cash. By January 2019, Jordan was still making payments, but clearly it was not enough to clear the huge debt. The intimidation didn't stop. Sandra Davis recalled another frightening incident in March 2019. Late one night, she heard noises and realized there were 5 men outside her house. Suddenly, the gang began smashing the front of the home. Every pane of glass was shattered. One man yelled at her, "Tell Jordan to pay his bills. It's not over. We'll be back." Terrified, Sandra fled her home after that attack and never returned. She was very angry with Jordan for bringing this danger to their doorstep. By now, Jordan himself was living in fear, constantly stressed and pale, as his mother described. Then, abruptly, Jordan's demeanor changed. In the spring of 2019, shortly after the March attack on his home, he suddenly appeared unworried, almost as if he believed the threat had passed. He mentioned that there was a suspicious individual in the area, a guy with North Face gloves going around the estate on an orange bike. But Jordan had been assured that this man wasn't looking for him. By May 2019, tensions in Dublin's criminal underworld were at a breaking point. A series of rapid-fire killings in the span of a week turned the feud into front-page news and struck fear throughout Coolock and Darndale. It began with the killing of Sha Little, the same young man who had threatened Jordan over the drug debt. On the night of May 21st, 2019, Sha Little was lured to a remote area on the outskirts of North Dublin. The 22-year-old was shot dead, and his body was found next to a burning car near Walshestown by the M1 motorway. Little had been a well-known figure in Coolock's underworld. He was closely associated with a Finglas-based gang leader and had ties to the international Kinahan Cartel. Gardaí suspected that Little's murder was a Gangland betrayal. He was likely killed because he wanted revenge for the murder of his friend, Zach Parker, earlier that year. Zach Parker, 23, had been shot dead on January 17, 2019, while sitting in his car outside a gym in Swords. Parker was a small-time drug dealer who, like Jordan, owed money, in his case to a Finglas gang nicknamed the Gucci Gang, a subgroup aligned with the Kinahan Cartel. He had reportedly lost a batch of drugs seized by police and couldn't repay the gang. Sha Little was a close friend of Parker's, and according to investigators, he was determined to strike back at Parker's killers. Though no one was immediately arrested for Little's murder, underworld rumor and evidence later pointed toward an unlikely suspect: Cowland Smith, the very man who had accompanied Little to threaten Jordan's mother. Smith was a hired gun for the Kinahan Cartel, and despite being friends with Little, he was suspected of double-crossing him. It appears Smith, likely acting on higher orders, eliminated Little, possibly to prevent any retaliatory attacks for Zach Parker. On May 22, 2019, the very next day, the feud struck again. Jordan Davis, despite all the warnings and fear, was out in the open, taking a walk with his infant son. The 22-year-old young father was pushing a pram with his 4-month-old baby along a pedestrian lane off Marigold Road when a lone hitman struck. A man on a distinctive orange bicycle pedaled into the lane, approached Jordan, and opened fire with a pistol. He squeezed off 8 shots in rapid succession. Jordan Davis was hit at least 3 times and collapsed to the ground next to the pram. Thankfully, his infant son was physically unharmed.
In Darndale today, a community counting the cost of the drug trade. Father Edward Quinn's parochial house overlooks the scene of yesterday's shooting. He was one of the first called to help Jordan Davis.
I was in the house and I heard 5 loud bangs just down here, down the lane there. There was a poor chap, obviously had been shot. So I had brought the holy oils with me and given him the last rites, because he was obviously had lost his life at that point.
There's both a national school and a secondary school just yards from the laneway here, and Jordan Davis was a former pupil of both. In a joint statement, the schools said they were open for counselling and guidance. The killing of Jordan Davis and his friend Sha Little the previous day is leading to renewed focus on drug crime and the funding of drug services.
Jordan's mother Sandra heard there had been a shooting in Darndale while she was on a bus that afternoon. Her phone rang with the news. Her niece told her Jordan was dead. Coming just 36 hours after Sha Little's death, it was immediately obvious to investigators that these 2 murders were linked. But who ordered Jordan's murder, and why? Initially, some speculated it might be retaliation for Little. The truth, as the trial later revealed, was even more direct. Jordan was killed for the very debt that had put him in danger all along. Within days, Garda detectives honed in on suspects. Wayne "Spuddy" Cooney, a 29-year-old man from Tallart, quickly emerged as the suspected triggerman on the orange bicycle. Cooney was an associate of Robert Rue Redmond and the boyfriend of Redmond's younger sister, Rachel. Investigators examined CCTV footage from the Darndale area and saw a man on an orange bike stalking the neighborhood in the days before the murder. The cyclist's build and movements caught the eye of detectives. One Garda witness would later testify that he was 100% sure the man in the CCTV was Wayne Cooney, whom he knew by sight and nickname. By early June 2019, Cooney was arrested and charged. Over the next few years, the pieces of the puzzle came together. Robert Rue had conspired with Cooney to murder Jordan Davis and settle the €70,000 debt once and for all. In fact, evidence presented in court showed that just 19 days before the murder, Robert Redmond himself sent Jordan a series of menacing WhatsApp messages.
The murder investigation uncovered WhatsApp messages between the victim and this man, Robert Redmond, in the weeks before the shooting. They included "effing clown that can't pay bills, trying to be a big man, trust me, I'll get you soon." Another said "it won't be long," followed by "very soon, bang bang."
He even punctuated it with laughing emojis, as if to taunt Jordan. Jordan replied simply, "Nice one, mate." 19 days later, Jordan was dead, and Redmond's grim promise had been fulfilled. The crackdown on the Coolock Feud ringleaders unfolded gradually. After the violent frenzy of 2019, Gardaí and prosecutors methodically went after those responsible. Wayne "Spuddy" Cooney, the hitman who pulled the trigger on Jordan Davis, was the first major figure to face justice. In July 2022, Cooney was found guilty of the murder of Jordan Davis in the Central Criminal Court. The evidence against him was overwhelming. CCTV footage, eyewitness testimony, and the trail of events linking him to the crime. Cooney, described by the court as an extremely dangerous individual, received the mandatory life sentence for the cold-blooded daylight execution. At 31 years old, he has been sentenced to 13 years behind bars. Next came Robert Rue Redmond. For a while, Redmond might have thought he had gotten away with it. He had not been present at the scene of Jordan's shooting, and with both Sha Little and Jordan Davis gone, he'd rid himself of both a volatile ally and a major debtor. However, the Gardaí had not missed Redmond's role. In fact, his then-girlfriend Aisling McNally provided crucial information. She testified that on May 22, 2019, the day of Jordan's murder, she dropped Robert Redmond off at a spot in Belcamp Lane near Darndale, where he said he was meeting some friends. Later that afternoon, right after Jordan was killed, she picked Redmond up from a nearby halting site around 4:13 p.m., just minutes after the shooting. This placed Redmond in the immediate vicinity during the murder, strongly suggesting he was coordinating with Cooney as the hit unfolded. Faced with mounting evidence, Robert Redmond eventually struck a deal. In April 2024, Redmond pleaded guilty to conspiring with Wayne Cooney to murder Jordan Davis on or about May 22, 2019. This plea was a significant breakthrough. Redmond was sentenced to 7 years in prison for the conspiracy. While 7 years might sound light, given the gravity of the crime, it must be noted that Redmond was already serving a life sentence for an unrelated murder at the time. He had been convicted in 2022 of the murder of a Dublin man, Barry Wolverson, in a 2020 shooting incident. The additional 7-year term for the Jordan Davis plot meant Redmond would remain locked up for a very long time. He will serve a 19-year minimum term, effectively guaranteeing this career gangster is off the streets. The full truth of how the Jordan Davis hit unfolded only came to light during the trial of one final participant, Rachel Redmond. Rachel was the younger sister of Rue Redmond and the girlfriend of Wayne Cooney back in 2019. She was not one of the trigger pullers or shot callers, but her actions in the immediate aftermath of Jordan's murder made her complicit. Prosecutors described her role bluntly. She helped a murderer escape. In March 2025, Rachel Redmond, 34, stood trial at the Central Criminal Court, charged with impeding the apprehension or prosecution of Wayne Cooney for Jordan's murder. By this time, Cooney was already convicted and serving life, and Robert Redmond had admitted his part. Rachel, however, pleaded not guilty and insisted she had no knowledge of the murder plot. The trial became the forum in which all the sordid details of the feud were hashed out, piece by piece, for the public record. Much of the evidence and testimony we've recounted was aired in that courtroom. Witness Stacey Hayes, Rachel's lifelong friend, recounted the critical moments just after Jordan Davis was shot. Stacey testified that on May 22, 2019, she was driving her silver Volkswagen Golf with Rachel in the passenger seat around Darndale at the time of the shooting. They had just heard there was a shooting nearby when Rachel's phone rang. It was Wayne Cooney calling, asking for a lift. According to Stacey, Rachel agreed and directed her to a bus stop in Clarehall on the Malahide Road, where Cooney said he was waiting. They arrived within minutes. Rachel was on a call as they drove. Cooney jumped into the car. Stacey Hayes remembered Rachel immediately saying to him, "There's been a shooting in Darndale," to which Wayne replied, "It's a mad place." The prosecution argued that Rachel's actions were hardly an innocent favor for her boyfriend. They pointed out how Stacey's car made a strange U-turn near Belcamp Lane, right after picking Wayne up, exactly the area where the gunman was last seen on CCTV. The suggestion was that Rachel knew exactly where to find Wayne, because she was coordinating with him. That same evening, she used her own bank card to book a room at the Clayton Hotel near Dublin Airport for Cooney, a place far enough from Coolock to lay low. CCTV footage showed Rachel at the hotel front desk after midnight, checking in under her name and securing a room for Wayne. She later claimed in court that she only got the hotel because there was no room for Wayne to stay at her family's house, a story the prosecution openly ridiculed. On the stand, Rachel Redmond stuck to her story. She insisted she had no idea that Wayne had just murdered Jordan Davis. She portrayed herself as a love-struck young woman who simply did her boyfriend a favor, saying, "I didn't think he would be capable of doing that," and that she never would have helped him if she knew. The jury, however, did not believe Rachel's denials. They argued that Rachel was effectively the getaway driver that day, enabling her boyfriend to evade capture in the critical hours after the murder. In late March 2025, after deliberating for over 7 hours, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty on both counts of impeding the investigation. Rachel Redmond was stunned. She immediately protested, "I didn't do it though. I didn't do anything. I shouldn't be here. I didn't do anything," she shouted from the dock as the reality set in. But the evidence and the jury said otherwise. As Rachel was led away in handcuffs, emotions overflowed in the courtroom. In the public gallery, supporters of the Davis family quietly celebrated the verdict. The court trial in 2025 did more than decide Rachel Redmond's fate. It peeled back the layers of a gangland feud that had torn through Dublin's north side 6 years earlier. A reminder that Dublin's underworld wars can erupt in broad daylight on quiet suburban streets. It has taken years for the full truth to emerge.